Clara Mae Thornton's hands were still raw from digging her husband's grave when she walked into Patterson's general store and asked for ammunition. The July heat of 1887 pressed down on Dusty Creek, Colorado, but the chill that ran through the store had nothing to do with weather. Every face turned away. Every voice went silent. She had buried Samuel alone. She had worked the horse ranch alone. And now, with 30 days to save everything she had left, she stood alone again until a stranger in a dusty coat did what no man in that town would do. Subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's story to the very end. Comment your city below so we can see how far this story travels. The bell above the door announced Clara Mae Thornton's arrival, but nobody looked up to greet her. She stood in the doorway of Patterson's general store, her worn boots leaving dusty prints on the wooden floor, her hands still bearing the calluses from yesterday's grave digging, clutched $5 silver, every cent she had left after paying the undertaker. "Mr. Patterson?" Her voice came out steady. She had practiced it on the ride into town, forced herself to swallow the grief that kept rising in her throat like bile. The shopkeeper busied himself with a bolt of fabric, his thick fingers suddenly clumsy. "Mrs. Thornton, I need 2 boxes of .44 ammunition." The store went quieter than a church at midnight. Clara felt the weight of every eye on her back, the women pretending to examine ribbons, the men studying their boots like they held the secrets of the universe. Patterson's mustache twitched. "Now, Mrs. Thornton, I don't reckon that's something I can help you with." "My money's good." Clara set the coins on the counter. They clinked against the scarred wood, loud in the silence. "Same money Samuel used to spend here every month for 5 years. It ain't about the money." "Then what is it about?" Patterson finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her stomach clench. Pity. The same pity she'd seen at Samuel's funeral at the bank at the feed store. Pity mixed with something else, relief that it wasn't their problem. "A woman alone shouldn't be handling firearms," Patterson said slowly, like he was explaining arithmetic to a child. "It ain't proper. It ain't safe. Why don't you let Sheriff Briggs handle whatever trouble you're facing?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Sheriff Briggs is Judge Prescott's brother-in-law. You know that as well as I do." The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Several customers suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. The door opened and closed 3 times in quick succession. "I can't help you," Patterson repeated, sliding her coins back across the counter. "I'm sorry about Samuel, truly. But selling ammunition to a widow woman folks would talk. Folks are already talking." Clara didn't touch the money. "They've been talking since the day Samuel died. They talked when I kept running the ranch alone. They talked when I refused to sell to Prescott. Let them talk." "Mrs. Thornton, my husband taught me to shoot before we were married. I can handle a rifle better than half the men in this town. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking to buy what any other customer could buy." Patterson's face reddened. He glanced toward the back room where his wife had conveniently disappeared. "The answer is no. I won't have it on my conscience if something happens. And if something happens because I can't defend myself, will that be on your conscience?" The shopkeeper had no answer for that. He simply shook his head and turned away, busying himself with inventory that didn't need counting. Clara stood there for a long moment, her face burning with humiliation. She wanted to scream. She wanted to sweep those coins off the counter and let them scatter across the floor. She wanted to remind every person in this store about every meal she'd cooked for church socials, every hour Samuel had spent helping neighbors with their cattle, every winter they'd shared supplies when times were lean. Instead, she picked up her money with steady hands and walked out into the July heat. The sun hit her like a physical blow. She pressed her back against the storefront wall, fighting to keep her composure. Her horse, a dappled gray mare named Shiloh, waited at the hitching post, watching her with patient eyes. "Well, girl," Clara murmured, "I reckon we're on our own." She was reaching for Shiloh's reins when a voice stopped her. "Ma'am?" Clara turned. A man stood a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. Tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. Dust covered his clothes, range dust the kind that came from weeks on the trail. A Colt revolver hung low on his hip, well-worn but well-maintained. "I don't need company," Clara said flatly. "No, ma'am, I don't expect you do." He didn't move closer, didn't try to crowd her space. Just stood there turning his hat in his hands like he was working up to something. "I was in the store," he said finally. "I heard what happened." "Then you heard me get refused, same as everyone else in there who didn't lift a finger." The words came out sharper than she intended. The man didn't flinch. "You're right," he said simply. "They should have spoken up. I should have spoken up. I didn't, and I'm not proud of that." Clara studied him, searching for mockery or pity, or that oily concern some men wore when they wanted something from a woman alone. She found none of it, just a quiet steadiness that reminded her painfully of Samuel. "What do you want? To make it right." He met her eyes directly. "I'd like to go back in there and buy the ammunition you need. Consider it a loan if that sits better with you." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" The man was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like the words cost him something. "I had a sister, Mary. She was married to a man who turned mean after the wedding. The kind of mean that doesn't show bruises where folks can see." He paused. "She needed help. She needed someone to stand up for her. And I wasn't there. I was off chasing outlaws across Kansas, thinking I was doing important work." Clara's throat tightened. "What happened to her?" "She survived, barely. Walked 12 miles to our mother's house in the middle of January, with nothing but the clothes on her back." His jaw clenched. "I quit my job the day I heard, rode home, and never went back." "You were law, deputy sheriff. 3 years in Lawrence." Clara absorbed this information. A lawman who'd given up his badge. A man who understood what it meant when someone needed help and no one would give it. 2 boxes of .44 ammunition, she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." He turned and walked back into the store. Clara waited, her heart pounding, half expecting him to come back out with an excuse. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The door opened. The stranger emerged with a small canvas sack, which he handed to her without ceremony. She looked inside. 2 boxes of ammunition. Exactly what she'd asked for. "I don't know your name," Clara realized. "Elijah Callahan. Most folks call me Eli." "Clara Thornton." She extended her hand, and he shook it firm, but not crushing his palm rough with calluses. "I'll pay you back, Mr. Callahan. You have my word." "I believe you, ma'am." They stood there for a moment, the July sun beating down the sounds of the town, carrying on around them, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. Clara felt it in her chest, a small spark of something she hadn't felt since Samuel's death. Hope. "Mr. Callahan, I don't know what kind of trouble you're running from, or what brought you to Dusty Creek, but I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to understand what you'd be getting into before you answer." Eli tilted his head slightly. "I'm listening." "Judge Harlan Prescott has been trying to take my ranch for 2 years. My husband refused to sell. 3 months ago, a paper showed up a debt Samuel supposedly owed before we were married. $1,000. Clara's voice hardened. "My husband never owed anyone a dime. He was the most honest man I ever knew. That paper is a forgery, and Prescott knows it. What's the judge want with your land? Water rights. The creek that runs through my property feeds half the valley. He controls the creek, he controls everyone." Clara met Eli's eyes. Samuel started asking questions, started talking to other ranchers about fighting back. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Eli went very still. "How did he die?" Doc Morrison said it was his heart. Samuel was 42 years old and could outwork any man in the county. Clara's jaw tightened. "I don't believe it was his heart. I can't prove anything, but I don't believe it." You think Prescott had something to do with it? I think my husband was healthy until he started threatening Prescott's plans. I think the timing was convenient. And I think nobody in this town will say a word against the most powerful man in the territory, even if they suspect the truth. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Clara watched emotions flicker across his face, calculation anger, and something else she couldn't name. How long do you have? 30 days. If I can't prove the debt is fraudulent or pay it off, Prescott takes the ranch. Clara lifted her chin. I'm not leaving. My grandfather built that ranch. My parents are buried there. Samuel is buried there. I will die on that land before I let Harlan Prescott have it. Then you shouldn't have to die alone. The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt her breath catch. Mr. Callahan. I've been drifting for 2 years. Eli settled his hat back on his head. Going nowhere in particular, running from something I couldn't outrun no matter how far I rode. Maybe it's time I stopped running. You don't know me. You don't know what you'd be walking into. I know what I saw in that store. A woman standing alone against a town full of cowards. His voice was steady. I know what that feels like. And I know I'm tired of being the man who shows up too late. Clara studied him, this stranger, who had appeared out of nowhere, and done more for her in 10 minutes than her neighbors had done in 3 months of grief. Every instinct told her to refuse to handle this herself the way she'd handled everything since Samuel died. But her father had taught her to recognize when pride became foolishness. And right now, with 30 days of forged debt and a powerful enemy, pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. I can't pay you, she said bluntly. I've got nothing until I sell the horses in the fall, and that's only if I still have a ranch to sell them from. I'm not asking for payment. Then what are you asking for? A place to sleep, meals when there's food to spare. Eli paused. And maybe a chance to be useful again. Clara wanted to ask what he meant by that. What demons were chasing him? What guilt was he trying to outrun? But those were questions for another time, if there was another time. The ranch is 15 miles east, she said. Follow the creek road until you see the gray barn. There's a bunkhouse that hasn't been used since our last hand quit. It's not much, but it's dry. I've slept in worse. I expect you have. Clara swung up onto Shiloh's back, settling into the worn saddle. Ride out whenever you're ready. I need to make one more stop before I head back. Where's that? The telegraph office. I have a letter to send someone who might be able to help prove that debt is a forgery. Clara gathered the reins. Mr. Callahan? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. For the ammunition and for... She struggled to find the right words. For seeing me. Most folks around here look right through me like I'm already gone. Something shifted in Eli's expression, a softening that made him look younger, more vulnerable. I know what that's like too, Mrs. Thornton. She nodded once and turned Shiloh toward the telegraph office. She didn't look back, but she could feel Eli's eyes on her as she rode away. The telegraph office sat at the end of Main Street, a cramped building, wedged between the barber shop and the lawyer's office. Clara dismounted and tied Shiloh to the post, noting that the lawyer's office bore a fresh coat of paint and a sign that read, Harold Finch, Esquire, Legal Services. Harold Finch was Judge Prescott's nephew. Clara pushed open the telegraph office door. The operator, a thin man named Willis with spectacles perpetually perched on his nose, looked up from his desk. Mrs. Thornton? Mr. Willis, I need to send a telegram to Denver. Willis glanced toward the window toward the lawyer's office next door. Denver. To a law firm, Abernathy and Associates. My husband had dealings with them before we were married. The operator's face went through a complicated series of expressions. Clara watched him calculate his job. His position in town, what Judge Prescott might think if he found out. The lines are down, Willis said finally. I can see the wires from here. They're not down. Technical difficulties. Should be fixed by next week. Next week. Maybe longer. Willis wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thornton. Nothing I can do." Clara stood very still. She thought about arguing, about demanding, about reminding Willis that the telegraph was a public service and he had no right to refuse her. But she could see it in his face, the fear, the resignation. Another person who'd decided that crossing Harlan Prescott wasn't worth the risk. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice flat. She walked out into the sunlight and nearly collided with a woman hurrying past Ida Mercy, the seamstress, who'd made Clara's wedding dress 3 years ago. "Clara!" Ida clutched her basket like a shield. "I didn't see you there." "Mrs. Mercy," Clara managed a thin smile. "How have you been?" "Oh, busy, busy. You know how it is." Ida's eyes darted toward the telegraph office, then back to Clara. "I was sorry to hear about Samuel. He was a good man." "Yes, he was." "If there's anything I can do—" "Actually, there is." Clara kept her voice pleasant. "I need to send a message to Denver. The telegraph office seems to be having difficulties. I was wondering if you might know someone making the trip who could carry a letter for me." Ida's face went pale. I couldn't. Clara, you know I would help if I could, but Judge Prescott is your landlord." The words fell between them like stones. Ida's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," the seamstress whispered. "I'm so sorry. I wish things were different, but I have my girls to think about. If I lost the shop—" "I understand." And Clara did understand, even as the understanding cut like a blade. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Mercy." She walked away before Ida could say anything else. Before the older woman's guilt could make Clara say something she'd regret. Shiloh nickered as Clara approached, sensing her distress. Clara pressed her forehead against the mare's warm neck and breathed deeply, fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. 30 days. No way to send word for help. A town full of people who wouldn't lift a finger. And somewhere behind her, a stranger who'd bought her ammunition for reasons she still didn't fully understand. Clara straightened her spine. She'd buried her husband with her own hands. She'd kept the ranch running through 3 months of grief. She'd faced down Patterson and Willis and all the small cowardices of a town too afraid to do what was right. She wasn't done fighting yet. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours through terrain that Clara knew like her own heartbeat. She'd ridden this path 1,000 times with her father as a girl, with Samuel, as a bride alone, as a widow. Every bend in the creek road, every stand of cottonwoods, every rise that revealed another piece of the valley below it, was all part of her, written into her bones. The Thornton Ranch sat in a small valley protected by hills on 3 sides. Her grandfather had chosen the spot for its water access, and natural shelter had built the gray barn and the 2-story farmhouse, with timber he'd felled himself. 3 generations of Thorntons had lived and died on this land. Clara would be damned if she'd be the one to lose it. She spotted Eli's horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied at the corral fence, as she crested the final hill. He was standing at the edge of the property, looking out over the valley, with an expression she couldn't read. "You beat me here," Clara said as she dismounted. "Didn't have any stops to make." Eli turned to face her. "This is beautiful land, Mrs. Thornton. It was my grandfather's dream. He came west with nothing but a horse and a rifle." Clara led Shiloh toward the barn. "Took him 15 years to build what you see, another 10 to make it profitable. And Prescott wants to take it. Prescott wants to take everything." Clara unsaddled Shiloh with practiced efficiency. "He's been buying up ranches all over the territory. The ones he can't buy he takes, one way or another." Eli followed her into the barn, his eyes cataloging everything: the well-maintained stalls, the quality of the equipment, the half-dozen horses watching with curious eyes. "You raise horses?" "Samuel and I built up the herd together. Mustangs mostly. We catch them wild, break them gentle, sell them to folks who need good working animals." Clara hung the saddle on its peg. I've got contracts with 2 army forts. The horses I'm raising right now will bring enough to pay off that fake debt twice over if I can hold out until fall. If. Judge Prescott controls the only bank in town. He also controls the sheriff, the land office, and apparently the telegraph. Clara's voice was bitter. 30 days isn't enough time to get help from outside, not without being able to send word. Eli was quiet for a moment. What about the other ranchers, the ones Prescott hasn't bought yet? Scared, every last one of them. Clara walked out of the barn and Eli followed. Can't blame them really. They've seen what happens to people who stand up to the judge. What happens? Clara stopped at the edge of the corral, watching her horses move in the golden afternoon light. The Hendersons' barn burned down 2 years ago, an accident officially. They sold out a week later. She paused. The Chen's water got poisoned last spring, killed half their livestock. They're still trying to recover, but they won't say a word against Prescott. And your husband? The question hung in the air. Clara gripped the corral fence until her knuckles went white. Samuel was different. He wasn't afraid. Her voice caught. He said if everyone just kept their heads down, Prescott would own the whole territory within 10 years. He said someone had to fight back. So he started fighting back. He started talking, organizing, getting other ranchers to see that they were stronger together than apart. Clara finally turned to face Eli. 3 weeks after his first meeting, he was dead. Doc Morrison said it was his heart. Natural causes. But you don't believe that. My husband could lift a full-grown calf over his shoulders. He could work sunup to sundown and still have energy to dance with me after supper. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. His heart was the strongest part of him. Eli's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. You think Prescott had him killed? I think someone put something in his food or his water. I think it happened slowly enough that nobody suspected. Clara's voice was steady now, cold with certainty. I think my husband was murdered, and I think the man who did it is sitting in his fancy house right now waiting for me to give up so he can take everything Samuel and I built together. What are you going to do about it? It was the first time anyone had asked her that question. Not, what can I do to help, or, you should let someone else handle this, or, maybe it's time to move on. Just a simple, direct question about her intentions. Clara felt something unlock in her chest. I'm going to prove that debt is a forgery. I'm going to expose Harlan Prescott for what he is, and I'm going to keep my ranch if I have to fight him with my bare hands. Eli nodded slowly. Then I reckon you'd better show me where the bunkhouse is. We've got work to do. That evening, Clara cooked dinner for the first time since Samuel's death. Nothing fancy, just salt pork and beans and biscuits from the day-old bread, but it felt strange to set 2 plates on the table instead of 1. Eli ate like a man who hadn't had a home-cooked meal in months, which Clara realized was probably the truth. How long have you been on the trail? She asked. 2 years, give or take. Eli mopped up the last of his beans with a biscuit. Since I left Kansas. You said you were a deputy there. 3 years. Worked my way up, thought I was making a difference. He set down his fork. Then I got word about Mary, and I realized I'd been so busy chasing bad men across the territory that I'd forgotten to protect the people who mattered. Clara understood that kind of guilt. The weight of it, the way it colored everything. What happened after you went home? Mary healed. Took a long time, but she healed. She's remarried now. Good man treats her right. A ghost of a smile crossed Eli's face. They've got 2 kids, a boy and a girl. And your mother? The smile faded. Passed last winter. Fever took her. I'm sorry. Don't be. She went peaceful with Mary and her grandchildren around her. Eli looked at Clara across the table. That's more than most folks get. They sat in silence for a while. 2 strangers bound together by circumstance and grief, by the peculiar alchemy of shared loss. Samuel and I were married for 3 years, Clara said finally. Sometimes it feels like forever. Sometimes it feels like we barely had any time at all. Do you have children? No. The word came out rough. We tried. It never took. Now it never will. I'm sorry. Don't be. I have this ranch. I have his memory. Clara stood and began clearing the dishes. And I have 30 days to make sure everything he worked for doesn't end up in Harlan Prescott's hands. Eli rose to help her, moving around the kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. Their hands brushed as he handed her a plate, and Clara felt a jolt of awareness that she quickly suppressed. It was too soon. It was far too soon. And besides, Eli Callahan would be gone when this was over. Men like him always moved on eventually. Tomorrow, Clara said, keeping her voice businesslike. I need to go through Samuel's papers again. Every document, every letter, everything he ever wrote down. If there's proof that debt is fraudulent, it's somewhere in this house. I can help with that. What else needs doing? The horses need exercising. The fences on the north pasture need checking. There's been someone cutting wire, probably Prescott's men trying to let the horses scatter. Clara dried her hands on her apron. And I need to figure out a way to get word to Denver without going through Willis at the telegraph office. The stagecoach. Prescott owns a stake in the company. The driver would report anything I sent. Mail. Same problem. Everything goes through town. Eli was quiet for a moment, thinking. What about the army? You said you've got contracts with 2 forts. Clara froze her hands, going still on the dishcloth. Fort Richardson is 3 days' ride, but I'd have to cross Prescott's land to get there the fast way. The long way through the mountains would take a week. A week there, a week back. That's half your time gone. I know. Clara turned to face him. But the commanding officer at Richardson, Colonel Marcus Webb, he knows me. Knows Samuel. If I could get word to him, he might be able to help. He's got telegraph access that Prescott can't touch. Then that's what we do. Eli leaned against the kitchen counter. You take the mountain route to Fort Richardson. I'll stay here and keep the ranch running. Make sure nobody helps themselves to your horses or burns down any barns while you're gone. You'd do that. Stay here alone. I've been alone for 2 years. A couple weeks more won't kill me. Clara wanted to argue. She barely knew this man, and she was talking about leaving him in charge of everything she owned. But what choice did she have? She couldn't make the trip and protect the ranch at the same time. There's a shotgun over the fireplace, she said slowly, and Samuel's rifle in the bedroom. If anyone from Prescott's outfit comes around, I'll handle it. Without killing anyone. The last thing I need is murder charges on top of everything else. Eli's lips quirked into something that was almost a smile. I spent 3 years keeping the peace in Lawrence, Mrs. Thornton. I know how to discourage unwanted visitors without leaving bodies. Clara nodded, the decision settling into place. It was a risk. Everything was a risk right now, but it was better than sitting here waiting for Prescott to make his next move. I'll leave at first light, she said. With luck, I'll be back in 12 days. And if you're not back in 14, then you take the horses and ride. There's no point both of us going down with this ship. Eli straightened up, his expression going hard. I didn't sign on to run at the first sign of trouble. You didn't sign on for anything. You bought me ammunition and offered to help. That doesn't obligate you to die for my ranch. No, Eli agreed. But I meant what I said earlier, Mrs. Thornton. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of showing up too late. He held her gaze. If this is where I make my stand, then this is where I make my stand. Clara felt something shift between them, something too new and fragile to name. Clara, she said quietly, if we're going to be fighting side by side, you should call me Clara. Clara. The name sounded different in his voice, warmer somehow. Then you should call me Eli. She nodded. Get some sleep, Eli. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He picked up his hat from the table and headed for the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think Samuel was right. Someone has to fight back. Otherwise, men like Prescott win, and they keep winning until there's nothing left worth having." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the porch steps as he walked toward the bunkhouse. Clara stood in her empty kitchen, listening to the silence. Outside, the summer night was alive with crickets and the distant call of an owl. Somewhere in the pasture, one of the horses whinnied softly. Tomorrow, she would ride into the mountains. Tomorrow, she would begin the fight for everything she had left. But tonight, for the first time in 3 months, she didn't feel entirely alone. Clara was saddling Shiloh in the pre-dawn darkness when Eli appeared at the barn door with a canvas sack in his hands. "Food for the road," he said. "Jerky hardtack, some dried apples I found in the pantry." "You didn't have to do that. You've got a 3-day ride through mountain country. You need to eat." He handed her the sack. "I also filled your canteen and checked your rifle. It's clean and loaded." Clara took the supplies, her throat tightening. Samuel used to do the same thing whenever she traveled pack food. She'd forget check weapons she'd overlook in her hurry to leave. "Eli, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't thank me. Just come back safe." She swung up into the saddle, settling the rifle across her lap. The first gray light of dawn was creeping over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "If anyone comes asking questions, you're a hired hand. Samuel brought you on before he died, and I kept you because I needed the help. Understood? And if Prescott's men show up, I'll handle it." Eli stepped back from the horse. "Go, Clara. Every hour you waste here is an hour you don't have." She nodded once and turned Shiloh toward the mountain trail. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she might not leave at all. The mountain route to Fort Richardson was treacherous in the best conditions. In July, with the summer storms that rolled through without warning, it was downright dangerous. But it was the only path Prescott didn't control, the only way Clara could move without his spies reporting her every step. She pushed Shiloh hard that first morning, putting as many miles as possible between herself and the valley before the sun reached its peak. The trail wound upward through stands of pine and aspen, crossing streams swollen with snowmelt, skirting cliffs that dropped away into nothing. By midday, Clara's muscles ached, and her eyes burned from squinting against the glare. She stopped by a creek to let Shiloh drink and rest, forcing herself to eat some of the jerky Eli had packed, even though her stomach was twisted with anxiety. 12 days. She had 12 days to reach Fort Richardson, convince Colonel Webb to help her and get back to the ranch. If she was even 1 day late, Eli would be alone against whatever Prescott decided to throw at him. She was remounting when she heard hoofbeats on the trail behind her. Clara's hand went to her rifle. She guided Shiloh off the path into a thick stand of aspens and waited, her heart pounding against her ribs. 2 riders appeared around the bend. Men she didn't recognize, but their horses bore the Prescott brand, a circle with a P inside. "I'm telling you, she went this way," the first man said. "Willis at the telegraph saw her asking about sending messages to Denver. She's trying to get word out. The judge said to follow her, not stop her. He wants to know where she's going." Clara held her breath. Shiloh shifted beneath her, and she pressed a hand against the mare's neck, willing her to stay silent. "Mountain route's a fool's errand anyway. She'll probably break her neck before she reaches anywhere useful. Prescott doesn't want to take chances. He says she's more dangerous than her husband was." The men passed within 20 feet of Clara's hiding spot. She could see the sweat on their horses, the dust on their clothes, the rifles slung across their backs. They didn't look into the aspens. They kept riding, their voices fading as they disappeared around the next bend. Clara waited a full 5 minutes before she moved. Her hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Prescott had sent men after her. He knew she was trying to get help, which meant someone in town had talked Willis or one of the customers at Patterson's store, or maybe even Ida Mercy, who'd seemed so apologetic but might have been too scared to keep quiet. Clara couldn't go back now. Going back meant leading those men straight to her ranch, straight to Eli. But going forward meant they were ahead of her on the trail waiting, unless she found another way. She pulled out the worn map Samuel had kept in his saddlebag, the one that showed every trail and shortcut in these mountains paths even the old-timers had forgotten. Samuel had spent years exploring this territory. He knew routes that weren't on any official map. Clara traced her finger along a thin line that branched off from the main trail about 2 miles ahead. It cut through a narrow canyon, climbed over a ridge that most folks considered impassable, and came out on the other side of the mountain a full day's ride closer to Fort Richardson. Samuel had called it the Devil's Backbone. He'd only taken it once, and he'd told Clara it was the most terrifying thing he'd ever done. She folded the map and tucked it back into the saddlebag. "Come on, girl," she murmured to Shiloh. "We're taking the hard way." The entrance to the Devil's Backbone was hidden behind a waterfall, a thin sheet of water cascading down a cliff face with just enough space behind it for a horse and rider to slip through. Clara had to dismount and lead Shiloh by the reins, talking to her in a steady voice, as the mare balked at the roaring water. "Easy, girl, easy. I know it looks bad, but Samuel did this. We can do it too." They emerged on the other side, soaking wet but intact. The canyon stretched before them, narrow and shadowed with walls that rose up on either side, like the hands of a giant pressing together. Clara remounted and urged Shiloh forward. The path was barely wide enough for the horse to walk, littered with loose stones that clattered and echoed in the confined space. Every sound seemed amplified Shiloh's hoofbeats. Clara's breathing, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. She didn't let herself think about what would happen if the canyon narrowed further. She didn't let herself think about the men on the main trail, or about Eli alone at the ranch, or about the 30 days ticking away like a countdown to disaster. She just rode. The canyon opened up after what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Clara found herself at the base of a steep ridge, looking up at a trail that switchbacked up the mountainside at an angle that made her stomach clench. The Devil's Backbone. "I'm sorry, Samuel," Clara whispered. "I'm starting to think you were crazy." She dismounted and led Shiloh up the first switchback, testing each foothold before trusting it with their weight. The horse followed reluctantly, her ears flat against her head, her eyes rolling with fear. Halfway up the trail narrowed to less than 2 feet wide. On one side was the rock face of the mountain. On the other was a drop that Clara refused to look at. "Don't think about it," she told herself. One step at a time. Just one step. A rock gave way beneath her boot. Clara threw herself against the mountain, grabbing at an outcropping with both hands as pebbles cascaded down into the void. Shiloh screamed and reared, and for one terrible moment, Clara thought the horse was going to go over the edge. "Easy, easy, girl!" Clara grabbed the reins and pulled, putting all her weight into keeping Shiloh on the trail. "Come on, you can do this. Just a little further." The mare trembled, but steadied. Clara pressed her forehead against Shiloh's neck, her own legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd hold her. "Good girl," she whispered. "Good girl. We're almost there." They weren't almost there. They were barely halfway up, but Clara couldn't let herself think about that. She kept climbing. The sun was setting by the time Clara reached the top of the ridge. She collapsed onto a flat rock, her muscles screaming, her lungs burning from the thin mountain air. Shiloh stood beside her, head drooping with exhaustion. But they'd made it. They'd crossed the Devil's Backbone, and now they were a full day ahead of Prescott's men, assuming those men hadn't found the waterfall passage, which Clara was betting they hadn't. She made camp in a shallow cave just below the ridgeline, too tired to build a fire, too wired to sleep. She lay on the hard ground with her rifle beside her and stared at the stars through the cave entrance, thinking about Samuel. He would have been proud of her today. He would have laughed at the story of the Devil's Backbone, would have pulled her close and told her she was the bravest woman he'd ever known. But Samuel was gone, and Clara was alone on a mountain in the middle of nowhere, racing against time to save everything they'd built together. She closed her eyes and forced herself to rest. Tomorrow would be another hard day. Back at the ranch, Eli was having troubles of his own. He'd spent the morning checking the fence line on the north pasture just as Clara had asked. What he found made his jaw clench with anger. 3 sections of wire had been cut clean cuts made with tools, not the ragged breaks you'd get from an animal pushing through. Someone had been here recently, probably within the last day or two, systematically creating holes that would let the horses scatter. Eli spent the afternoon repairing the damage, stringing new wire, and reinforcing the posts. It was hard work, the kind of work that left your hands raw and your shoulders aching, but it felt good to be useful. It felt good to be doing something that mattered. He was finishing the last section when he heard riders approaching. Eli straightened up his hand, moving casually to rest on the butt of his revolver. 3 men were coming up the road toward the ranch house, riding slow and easy like they owned the place. The man in front was big with a barrel chest and a face that looked like it had been in too many fights. The 2 behind him were younger, leaner, with the hungry look of men who did dirty work for pay. "Afternoon," the big man called out. "Looking for Mrs. Thornton." "She's not here." Eli walked toward them, keeping his movements unhurried. "I'm the hired hand. Something I can help you with." Hired hand. The big man's eyes swept over Eli, taking in the worn clothes, the dust-covered boots, the revolver hanging low on his hip. "Funny. I don't recall the Thorntons having any hired hands. Mr. Thornton brought me on before he passed. Mrs. Thornton kept me because the work still needs doing." "Is that so?" The big man leaned forward in his saddle. "Name's Colt Becker. I work for Judge Prescott. The judge has some business with Mrs. Thornton. Urgent business. Like I said, she's not here." "Where'd she go?" "Didn't say. I'm just the hired hand." Becker's eyes narrowed. Eli kept his face blank. His posture relaxed, but every muscle in his body was coiled and ready. "The judge is a patient man," Becker said slowly. "But his patience has limits. You tell Mrs. Thornton that when she gets back. Tell her the judge wants to talk about that debt she owes. Tell her it would be better for everyone if she just signed the papers and moved on." "I'll pass along the message." Becker smiled, a cold, ugly thing that didn't reach his eyes. "You do that." He turned his horse. "Oh, and friend, I'd be careful if I were you. Accidents happen on ranches all the time. Fires, stampedes. Man could get hurt if he wasn't paying attention." The 3 riders left the way they'd come, kicking up dust as they went. Eli watched them until they disappeared over the hill, his hand still resting on his revolver. Then he went to check on the horses. They were restless, picking up on his tension, moving in circles around the corral. Eli counted them twice, making sure none had slipped through the holes in the fence before he'd repaired them. All present. All safe. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That night, Eli didn't sleep in the bunkhouse. He dragged a chair onto the porch of the main house and sat there with Clara's shotgun across his lap, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. Becker's visit had been a warning. The next visit might not be so polite. 2 days passed. Clara pushed Shiloh as hard as she dared, stopping only when the horse was too exhausted to continue. She ate in the saddle, slept in. Snatches counted the hours like a miser counting coins. On the 3rd day, she crested a hill and saw Fort Richardson spread out below her, a cluster of buildings, surrounded by a wooden palisade, the American flag snapping in the mountain breeze. Clara nearly wept with relief. She rode through the gates at a trot, ignoring the curious stares of the soldiers on duty. She'd been traveling for 3 days without a proper bath or a change of clothes. She probably looked like something that had crawled out of the wilderness. She didn't care. "I need to see Colonel Webb," she told the young private who approached her. "Tell him Clara Thornton is here. Tell him it's urgent." The private's eyes widened. He clearly recognized her name, and he hurried off toward the commander's quarters. Clara dismounted and led Shiloh to a water trough, letting the mare drink while she waited. 10 minutes later, the private returned. "Colonel Webb will see you now, ma'am." Marcus Webb was a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and the kind of presence that made you stand up straighter without thinking about it. He'd been buying horses from the Thornton Ranch for 5 years, and he'd attended Samuel's funeral riding all the way from the fort to pay his respects. "Mrs. Thornton." He rose from behind his desk as Clara entered, genuine concern on his weathered face. "You look like you've ridden through hell to get here." "Something like that." Clara sank into the chair he offered her, legs threatening to give out. "Colonel, I need your help." She told him everything: the forged debt, the 30-day deadline, the town's refusal to help the telegraph operator who wouldn't send her messages. She told him about Prescott's men following her through the mountains, about the Devil's Backbone, about leaving a stranger to guard her ranch because she had no other choice. Webb listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. "Harlan Prescott," he said when she finished. "I've heard that name before. He owns half the territory, Colonel, and he wants to own the other half, including your water rights. Including everything." Clara leaned forward. "Colonel, I know this isn't army business. I know I'm asking for more than I have any right to ask. But I can't prove that debt is a forgery without getting word to someone outside Prescott's reach. I can't fight him alone." Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parade ground where soldiers were drilling in the afternoon heat. "Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Thornton, one of the best I've had the privilege of knowing. He supplied this fort with quality horses at fair prices, and he never once tried to cheat us." He turned to face her. "Do you know what he said to me the last time I saw him?" Clara shook her head. "He said there was a cancer growing in your territory. A man who was buying up land and power, crushing anyone who stood in his way. He said someone needed to cut that cancer out before it spread too far." Webb's jaw tightened. 2 weeks later, he was dead. You think Prescott had him killed? I think it's a hell of a coincidence." The colonel moved back to his desk. "I can't send soldiers to fight your battle, Mrs. Thornton. That's not within my authority. But I can send telegrams to Denver, to Washington, to anyone you want. And I can send them on military lines that Prescott can't touch." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Colonel, I can also give you an escort back to your ranch. 4 soldiers armed and mounted. Enough to discourage anyone who might be thinking about causing trouble." "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask. I'm offering." Webb's voice softened. "Samuel Thornton was my friend. If someone had him killed, I want to know. And I want to see justice done." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Now," Webb said, pulling a fresh sheet of paper from his desk, "tell me who you need to contact in Denver. Let's start cutting this cancer out." On the 6th day, Clara rode back into her valley with 4 army soldiers at her back. She'd been gone 8 days, total 3 days to Fort Richardson, 2 days to send messages and receive replies, 3 days back by a safer route that the soldiers knew. Colonel Webb's telegrams had reached Abernathy and Associates in Denver, and the reply had been everything Clara had hoped for. Samuel had kept records, detailed records of every transaction, every payment, every piece of business he'd ever conducted. Those records were stored with the law firm in Denver, and they clearly showed that the debt Prescott claimed had been paid in full 6 years ago. The firm was sending a representative to Dusty Creek with copies of the documentation. He would arrive within the week. Clara had proof. She had witnesses. She had the United States Army watching Prescott's every move. For the first time since Samuel's death, she felt like she might actually win. The ranch came into view as she crested the final hill. Everything looked intact. The house, the barn, the corral full of horses. No smoke, no destruction, no sign of violence. But Eli was nowhere to be seen. Clara kicked Shiloh into a gallop, her heart suddenly pounding with fear. She'd been gone 8 days. Anything could have happened in 8 days. She was halfway to the house when Eli emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. He lowered it when he saw her, and even from this distance, Clara could see the relief that flooded his face. "You made it," he said, as she reined in beside him. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much in days. "I made it." Clara dismounted and turned to the soldiers. "Sergeant, thank you for the escort. You're welcome to water your horses before you head back." The sergeant nodded and led his men toward the well. Clara turned back to Eli, really looking at him for the first time. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes and a fresh cut on his cheekbone that hadn't been there when she left. His clothes were dirty, his jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. "What happened?" Clara demanded. "Eli, what happened while I was gone? Nothing I couldn't handle." "That cut on your face says different." Eli touched the wound almost absently. "Becker came back. Him and 5 others. They wanted to see if you'd left the place unguarded." Clara's blood ran cold. 5 men. They weren't expecting resistance. Most of them ran after I fired a few warning shots. A ghost of a smile crossed Eli's face. "Becker didn't run. We had a discussion about property rights. He saw things my way eventually." "A discussion." He threw the first punch. Clara stared at him. This man who had stayed to protect her ranch, who had faced down 6 of Prescott's men alone, who had taken a beating rather than abandon his post. "Eli Callahan," she said slowly, "you are either the bravest man I've ever met, or the most foolish." "Probably both." He looked at the soldiers watering their horses. "I take it your trip was successful." "More than successful." Clara couldn't keep the triumph out of her voice. "I have proof, Eli. Written proof that Prescott's debt is a forgery. A lawyer from Denver is on his way to present it to the court." For the first time since she'd known him, Eli's face broke into a genuine smile. It transformed him, made him look younger and lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Then we're going to win," he said. "We're going to win," Clara agreed. She looked at her ranch, her grandfather's dream, her parents' legacy, her and Samuel's life work. The house that had sheltered 4 generations of her family. The land that held the bones of everyone she'd ever loved. She was going to keep it. She was going to fight Harlan Prescott, and she was going to win. And she wasn't going to do it alone. The lawyer from Denver arrived 3 days later, riding into Dusty Creek on the morning stagecoach with a leather satchel full of documents that would change everything. His name was Theodore Marsh, a thin man with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the kind of quiet confidence that came from winning cases against men who thought they were untouchable. Clara met him at the stagecoach depot, acutely aware of the eyes watching from every window on Main Street. "Mrs. Thornton?" Marsh shook her hand firmly. "I reviewed your husband's files before I left Denver. What Judge Prescott has done is not just fraud, it's criminal." "Can you prove it in court?" "I can prove it anywhere." Marsh patted his satchel. "I have the original receipt showing this debt was paid in 1881. I have bank records. I have Samuel's ledgers with corresponding entries." He lowered his voice. "I also have something else. Something your husband sent to our firm 6 months before he died." Clara's heart stuttered. "What?" "A letter, detailing his suspicions about Judge Prescott's activities. Names, dates, properties he believed were acquired through coercion." Marsh's eyes were grave. "Your husband was building a case, Mrs. Thornton. He was gathering evidence to bring Prescott down." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Samuel had never told her. He'd been fighting this battle in secret, protecting her from the danger, and it had gotten him killed. "Does Prescott know about the letter?" "If he did, I suspect your husband's files would have disappeared long ago." Marsh glanced around. "We should discuss this somewhere private. I have a feeling the walls in this town have ears." They rode back to the ranch together, Marsh on a rented horse that clearly made him nervous. Eli was waiting on the porch when they arrived, his hand resting casually on his revolver until he saw Clara's nod of reassurance. "Eli Callahan, Theodore Marsh," Clara said. "Mr. Marsh is the lawyer from Denver." The 2 men shook hands, sizing each other up in that way men do. "Former lawman?" Marsh asked, noting Eli's stance the way he positioned himself to watch the road. "Former deputy. Kansas." "Good." We might need someone who knows how to handle trouble before this is over." They went inside, and Marsh spread his documents across the kitchen table. Clara listened as he explained the legal strategy, filing a counterclaim against Prescott for fraud, presenting the evidence to the territorial court, demanding a full investigation into all of Prescott's land acquisitions. "The hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now," Marsh said. "Judge Whitmore is coming down from Carson City to preside. He's outside Prescott's influence, which is why I specifically requested him." 3 days. Clara's hands were trembling. "And then it's over. If everything goes according to plan." Marsh hesitated. "But Mrs. Thornton, I should warn you, men like Prescott don't go down without a fight. He's going to try something before that hearing. He has to." "Let him try," Eli said quietly. "We'll be ready." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Samuel's letter, about all the secrets he'd kept to protect her. She understood why he'd done it. He'd been trying to shield her from danger, but it still hurt. They'd been partners in everything, or so she'd thought. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Yes. It's Eli. There's someone outside. Came alone on foot. Says she needs to talk to you." Clara grabbed her robe and followed Eli downstairs. Through the front window, she could see a figure standing at the edge of the porch light, small, hunched, wrapped in a dark shawl. "It's Ida Mercy," Clara said, surprised. She opened the door. The seamstress stood there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. "Clara," Ida's voice cracked. "I had to come. I had to tell you, God forgive me. I had to tell you the truth." "Come inside." Clara stepped back. "Eli, make some coffee." They sat at the kitchen table, Clara, Eli Marsh, and Ida Mercy, who clutched her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. "I should have told you weeks ago," Ida said. "I should have told you the day Samuel died. But I was scared. I'm still scared. But I can't live with this anymore." "Live with what, Mrs. Mercy?" Ida took a shaky breath. "I know how your husband died. I know because I saw it happen." The room went absolutely still. "What do you mean you saw it?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I was delivering a dress to Mrs. Patterson. I was walking past the saloon when I saw Samuel come out. He'd been meeting with some of the other ranchers, trying to organize them like he'd been doing." Ida's hands were shaking so badly the coffee sloshed in her cup. "Colt Becker was waiting for him. He grabbed Samuel, dragged him into the alley. I heard Samuel arguing, fighting back. Then it got quiet." "What did you see?" Marsh leaned forward, his lawyer's instincts fully engaged. "Becker came out alone. He was wiping something off his hands, a cloth, like he'd been holding something wet." Ida's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel didn't come out. Not for a long time. When he finally did, he was stumbling, holding his chest. He made it home somehow. The next morning, he was dead." Clara felt like she was drowning. The room seemed to tilt and spin around her. "You're saying Becker poisoned my husband?" "I'm saying Becker did something to him in that alley. Something that killed him." Ida was sobbing now. "I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell the sheriff. But Prescott owns my building. He owns half the town. If I spoke up, I'd lose everything. My shop, my home, my girls." "Why now?" Eli's voice was hard. "Why tell us now?" "Because it's eating me alive." Ida looked at Clara with anguished eyes. "Because every time I see you fighting alone, I think about Samuel. I think about how he died trying to help people like me, and I did nothing. I couldn't save him, but maybe I can help save you." Clara sat very still for a long moment. The grief she'd been carrying for 3 months transformed into something else, something hot and sharp and dangerous. "Will you testify?" she asked quietly. "At the hearing, will you tell Judge Whitmore what you just told us?" Ida hesitated. Fear warred with guilt across her face. "If I testify, Prescott will destroy me." If you don't testify, he'll destroy all of us." Clara reached across the table and took Ida's hands. "You said you couldn't save Samuel. This is your chance to make sure he didn't die for nothing." The tears spilled down Ida's cheeks. "He was a good man, Clara. He deserved better than what happened to him." "Yes, he did." Clara squeezed Ida's hands. "Help me give him justice." Ida was silent for an eternity. Then slowly she nodded. "I'll testify." The next morning, word spread through Dusty Creek like wildfire. The widow Thornton had proof that Judge Prescott's debt claim was fraudulent. A lawyer from Denver was preparing to expose the judge's crimes. A hearing had been scheduled with an outside judge, and Ida Mercy, the seamstress who'd kept her head down for 20 years, had been seen leaving the Thornton ranch before dawn. The town held its breath. Clara spent the day going over testimony with Marsh, preparing for every question the judge might ask, every objection Prescott's lawyers might raise. Eli stood guard watching the road, his rifle never far from his hands. It was late afternoon when the first visitor arrived. Marcus Freeman, the blacksmith, rode up to the ranch on a draft horse that made Shiloh look like a pony. He was a big man, dark-skinned and powerful, with hands that could bend iron and a gentle voice that belied his size. "Mrs. Thornton." He dismounted and removed his hat. "I heard what's happening. I heard you're finally going to fight back." News travels fast. In a town this small, everything travels fast. Marcus twisted his hat in his hands. "I came to tell you my wife and we're with you. Whatever you need." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Why, Mr. Freeman? You've got as much to lose as anyone." "Because your husband was the only man in this town who treated me like a human being." Marcus's voice was rough. "When I first came here, nobody would do business with me. Said they didn't want a colored man's work. Samuel Thornton walked into my shop on my second day and ordered new shoes for every horse on his ranch. Paid in advance." He met Clara's eyes. "He said a man's worth isn't in his skin, it's in his work. I never forgot that." Clara had to blink back tears. That was Samuel. That was exactly who he'd been. "Thank you, Mr. Freeman." "There's more of us than you think, Mrs. Thornton. Folks who are tired of being scared, tired of watching Prescott take whatever he wants. They just need someone to show them it's possible to fight back." He rode away, and Clara watched him go with a new feeling blooming in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her ranch anymore. She was fighting for everyone Prescott had ever hurt. Every person he'd ever silenced, every dream he'd ever crushed. That evening, more visitors came. The Chens, who'd lost half their livestock to poisoned water, arrived with fresh vegetables from their garden and a promise to testify about the threats they'd received. Tom Henderson, whose barn had mysteriously burned 2 years ago, rode in from his small remaining plot of land and told Clara he'd sign an affidavit about the arson. One by one, the people Prescott had terrorized began to find their courage. But Prescott wasn't finished. He couldn't be. Clara was proven right just after midnight. She was dozing in a chair too wired to really sleep when Eli burst through the door. "Fire! The north pasture!" Clara grabbed her rifle and ran. She could see the glow before she reached the corral, flames licking at the dry grass, spreading fast in the summer heat. The horses were screaming, throwing themselves against the fence in panic. "Get the horses out!" Clara shouted. "I'll get water." She ran to the pump, filling bucket after bucket, her arms burning with the effort. Eli managed to open the corral gate, and the horses bolted past him into the open fields away from the flames. They fought the fire for hours. Marcus Freeman appeared out of the darkness with more buckets, then the Chens, then others. Clara barely recognized in the chaos of smoke and flame. By the time dawn broke, the fire was out, but a quarter of the north pasture was nothing but ash. Clara stood in the ruins, soot-streaked and exhausted, her hands blistered from the bucket handles. "This was Prescott," she said flatly. "Can't prove it." Eli's voice was hoarse from smoke. "No witnesses, no evidence." "We don't need proof. We just need to survive until the hearing. That's tomorrow. Clara looked at him, at this man who had fought beside her all night, who had stayed when any sane person would have run. Then we survive until tomorrow. The morning of the hearing, Clara put on her best dress, the blue one Samuel had always loved, and pinned her hair up properly for the first time in months. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Older somehow, harder, but also stronger. Eli was waiting by the wagon when she came downstairs. He'd cleaned up, shaved, and put on a fresh shirt, though he still wore his gun belt. "You ready?" he asked. "No." Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. "But I'm going anyway." The ride into town felt different. People stood on their porches watching as Clara's wagon passed. Some nodded. Some called out words of encouragement. By the time she reached Main Street, a small crowd had gathered outside the town hall where the hearing would be held. Ida Mercy was there, pale but determined. Marcus Freeman stood beside her, massive and reassuring. The Chens, the Hendersons. A dozen other faces Clara recognized from the previous night, all of them waiting, all of them ready to stand with her. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for tears later. Right now, she had a fight to win. Inside the town hall, Judge Whitmore sat behind a makeshift bench, a stern-faced man with silver hair and the air of someone who'd seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything. Harlan Prescott sat at one table with two lawyers looking as calm and confident as if this were a church social instead of a fraud hearing. He smiled when Clara entered. A cold, predatory smile that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Thornton." His voice carried across the room. "I'm sorry it's come to this. If you'd simply accepted my generous offer, none of this unpleasantness would be necessary." Clara didn't respond. She took her seat beside Marsh and folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "This hearing will come to order." Judge Whitmore's voice was crisp and commanding. "We are here to examine the validity of a debt claim filed by Judge Harlan Prescott against the estate of Samuel Thornton. Mr. Marsh, I understand you represent Mrs. Thornton. I do, Your Honor. And you claim the debt in question is fraudulent. I do, Your Honor, and I have documentation to prove it." Marsh presented his evidence methodically, the original receipt, the bank records, Samuel's ledgers. Clara watched Prescott's lawyers object and argue, watched Judge Whitmore overrule them one by one. Then Marsh played his final card. "Your Honor, I also have in my possession a letter written by Samuel Thornton 6 months before his death. In this letter, Mr. Thornton details his suspicions about Judge Prescott's pattern of acquiring land through fraudulent means. He names specific properties, specific victims, specific methods used to coerce or defraud the rightful owners." The room exploded. Prescott was on his feet shouting. His lawyers were demanding the letter be excluded. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. "Furthermore," Marsh continued when the noise finally died down, "I have witnesses prepared to corroborate Mr. Thornton's claims. Witnesses who have been too afraid to speak until now." One by one, they took the stand. Marcus Freeman describing the threats he'd received when he refused to sell his shop. The Chens recounting the poisoned water and the generous offer that came a week later. Tom Henderson, his voice shaking as he described watching his barn burn, while Prescott's men stood across the road watching. And finally, Ida Mercy. The seamstress walked to the witness stand with her head held high, though Clara could see her hands trembling. She told her story simply and directly, what she'd seen outside the saloon, Becker dragging Samuel into the alley, the silence, the stumbling man who'd emerged looking like death itself. "Are you saying Judge Prescott had Samuel Thornton killed?" Judge Whitmore asked. "I'm saying Colt Becker did something to Samuel Thornton that night, and Colt Becker works for Judge Prescott." Ida's voice was steady now. "You can draw your own conclusions, Your Honor." Prescott lunged to his feet. "This is absurd. This woman is lying. She's been paid off by the Thornton woman." "Sit down, Judge Prescott." Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. "One more outburst, and I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Prescott sat, but his face had gone a dangerous shade of red. Clara could see him calculating, could see him realizing that his carefully built empire was crumbling around him. "Your Honor." One of Prescott's lawyers stood, his voice oozing false calm. "While these allegations are certainly dramatic, they're nothing but hearsay and circumstantial evidence. There's no proof that Judge Prescott was involved in any—" The door at the back of the room slammed open. Everyone turned. A young man stood in the doorway. Colt Becker, his face pale, his eyes wild. He had a gun in his hand. "Nobody move!" The room froze. Clara felt Eli tense beside her, his hand moving toward his revolver. "Becker, what are you doing?" Prescott's voice was sharp. "Put that gun down. You think I'm going to hang for you?" Becker's laugh was high and ragged. "You think I'm going to take the fall while you walk away? Not a chance, old man." "Mr. Becker." Judge Whitmore's voice was remarkably calm. "I suggest you lower your weapon before you make this situation worse than it already is." "Worse." Becker swung the gun toward Prescott. "He ordered me to kill Samuel Thornton. He told me exactly how to do it, the poison, the timing, everything. Said it had to look natural, said nobody would ever know." He was breathing hard now, sweat running down his face. "Well, guess what everybody knows now." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Prescott moved. Faster than Clara would have thought possible for a man his age, he grabbed a gun from one of his lawyers and pointed it at Becker. "You stupid, worthless—" Eli tackled Clara to the floor as the first shot rang out. Chaos erupted, screaming the thunder of gunfire, the crash of overturned furniture. Clara pressed herself against the wooden floor, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Then, silence. She lifted her head. Becker was on the ground bleeding from a wound in his shoulder. Prescott was being held down by 3 men, including Marcus Freeman, whose massive hands pinned the judge's arms behind his back. "Is everyone all right?" Judge Whitmore's voice cut through the chaos. "Anyone injured?" Eli pulled Clara to her feet. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Her voice came out steady, though her whole body was shaking. "I'm fine." Judge Whitmore stood at his bench looking down at the scene before him. Becker bleeding on the floor. Prescott struggling against the men holding him, the terrified faces of everyone in the room. "Harlan Prescott," he said, his voice carrying the weight of law and justice. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder fraud and attempted murder. This court finds the debt claim against the Thornton estate to be fraudulent and void." He looked at Clara. "Mrs. Thornton, your property is safe." Clara heard the words, but they didn't seem real. After everything, the fire, the fear, the 3 months of fighting alone, it was over. It was actually over. Eli's hand found hers and squeezed. Clara squeezed back, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. Outside, she could hear cheering. The crowd that had gathered to watch the hearing had heard the commotion, and word was spreading fast. Prescott was finished. The widow Thornton had won. But standing there in the chaos of the courtroom, Clara didn't feel victorious. She felt empty. She felt exhausted. And for the first time since Samuel's death, she felt like she might finally be able to grieve. The days after the hearing passed in a blur of activity that Clara barely registered. Prescott was taken to Carson City in chains along with Becker and 3 of his men. The territorial marshal arrived to oversee the investigation, and suddenly Dusty Creek was crawling with lawmen asking questions, taking statements, digging into years of buried crimes. Clara answered their questions. She signed papers. She shook hands with men who told her she was brave, who told her Samuel would be proud. She felt nothing. On the 4th day after the hearing, Eli found her standing at Samuel's grave on the hillside. She hadn't heard him approach, but somehow she wasn't surprised when he stopped beside her. "You haven't slept," he said quietly. "Neither have you. I'm not the one who just fought a war." Clara kept her eyes on the wooden cross that marked her husband's resting place. Samuel Thornton, 1845 to 1887. Beloved husband. The words seemed too small, too simple for everything he'd been. "I thought I would feel different," she said finally. "I thought when it was over, when Prescott was gone, I would feel something. Relief. Satisfaction. Justice." "What do you feel?" "Empty." The word came out hollow. "Like there's a hole in my chest that nothing can fill." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down on the bench beside the grave, the one Clara had put there, so she could sit and talk to Samuel when the grief got too heavy to carry standing up. "After I left Kansas," he said slowly, "I spent 6 months drinking myself half to death, convinced myself that if I could just get numb enough, I wouldn't feel the guilt anymore." Clara turned to look at him. "It didn't work," Eli continued. "The guilt was still there every morning, along with a headache that made me wish I was dead." He met her eyes. "Then one day I woke up and realized the guilt wasn't about what I'd done. It was about what I hadn't done. All the things I never said to Mary, all the times I should have been there and wasn't." "How did you make it stop?" "I didn't. I just learned to live with it." Eli's voice was rough. "The guilt never goes away completely, Clara. But eventually it gets lighter. Eventually you start to remember the good things more than the bad. Eventually you realize that carrying all that weight doesn't honor the people you lost. It just makes it harder to honor them by living well." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. "I never got to say goodbye," she whispered. "He was fine at dinner. We talked about the horses, about the fall sale, about building an extra room onto the house, and then in the morning he was gone." "What would you have said if you'd known?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Clara closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. "I would have told him I was scared. That I knew what he was doing was dangerous, but I was too proud to ask him to stop. I would have told him that the ranch didn't matter as much as he did, that I'd rather lose everything than lose him." He knew. "How can you know that?" "Because I saw the way he looked at you in that photograph in your kitchen." Eli's voice was gentle. "A man doesn't look at a woman like that unless he knows exactly how much she loves him." Clara broke then. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside her, wrenching and painful, all the grief she'd been holding back since the morning she'd found Samuel cold and still in their bed. She cried for the husband she'd lost, for the future they'd never have, for the children they'd never raise together. Eli didn't try to stop her. He didn't offer meaningless words of comfort. He just sat beside her on the bench, a solid presence in the midst of her storm, and let her grieve. When the tears finally subsided, Clara felt wrung out, exhausted, but somehow lighter, like she'd been carrying a boulder on her shoulders and had finally set it down. "Thank you," she said hoarsely. "For what?" "For not telling me it would be okay. For not pretending you have answers you don't have." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "For just being here." Eli nodded. Then he stood and offered her his hand. "Come on. You need food and sleep in that order." Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His palm was warm and calloused, steady and strong. She held on longer than she needed to. Neither of them mentioned it. Over the following weeks, the ranch slowly came back to life. The Army contracts came through as promised, and Clara sold the horses she'd been training for a price that made Marsh raise his eyebrows in approval. The burned pasture began to show green shoots pushing up through the ash. The fence lines were repaired, the barn restocked, the routine of ranch work resuming its familiar rhythm. And through it all, Eli stayed. He never talked about leaving. He never mentioned the drifting life he'd led before, the jobs waiting for him elsewhere, the road that had always called him forward. He simply woke each morning and worked beside Clara until sunset, ate dinner at her table, sat with her on the porch, watching the stars come out. People in town started to talk. "They're saying we're living in sin," Clara told Eli one evening, a hint of dark humor in her voice. "Apparently, a widow woman and an unmarried man under the same roof is scandalous." Same people who wouldn't sell you ammunition. The very same. Eli snorted. Funny how quick folks forget who stood up for them. They haven't forgotten. Clara stretched her legs out in front of her, feeling the pleasant ache of a day's hard work. Mrs. Patterson brought me a pie yesterday. Said she was sorry for how Henry treated me at the store. You accept her apology? I accepted the pie. Apologies take longer. Eli laughed a real laugh, warm and surprised. Clara realized she'd never heard him laugh like that before. It changed his whole face, made him look younger and lighter, like the man he might have been before guilt and grief had carved their marks into him. What? He asked, catching her staring. Nothing, I just... Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. I like your laugh. You should do it more often. Something shifted in Eli's expression. Something tender and uncertain that made Clara's heart beat faster. Clara, don't. She held up a hand. Whatever you're about to say, don't. It's too soon. I'm not ready. I know. His voice was quiet. I wasn't going to push. I want you to know that when you are ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Clara looked at him. This man who had walked into her life by chance and stayed by choice. Who had fought beside her, bled for her, held her while she grieved. Who asked nothing and gave everything. Why? She asked. Why did you stay? You could have been long gone by now. There's nothing keeping you here. You're wrong. Eli held her gaze. There's you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest and terrifying. Clara felt her breath catch. I can't promise anything, she said finally. I don't know what I want yet. I don't know who I am without Samuel. I'm not asking for promises. Eli's voice was steady. I'm just telling you the truth. You deserve to know where I stand. And where is that? Right here. He reached out and took her hand, gentle and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. Right here beside you for as long as you'll have me. Clara didn't pull away. They sat like that until the stars came out hand in hand on the porch of the house her grandfather had built, and Clara felt something new take root in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first green shoot pushing up through ash. 3 months passed. Summer faded into fall, and fall into the first hints of winter. The ranch prospered, the horses sold, the debts paid. Clara hired 2 hands to help with the increased workload, young men from town who were eager to prove themselves and grateful for honest work. Eli became her partner in everything but name. They made decisions together, argued over strategies, celebrated successes, and weathered setbacks side by side. The townspeople stopped talking about scandal and started talking about the Thornton Ranch as a model of what hard work and determination could achieve. But still something remained unspoken between them. It was Ida Mercy who finally pushed Clara to confront it. The seamstress had become a regular visitor to the ranch, bringing sewing projects and town gossip, and the kind of maternal concern that Clara hadn't experienced since her own mother died. On a cold November afternoon, she sat in Clara's kitchen, mending a torn shirt and watching Clara with knowing eyes. "That man loves you," Ida said without preamble. Clara nearly dropped the pot she was carrying. "Ida, don't pretend you don't know. Everyone can see it, except apparently you." "I see it." Clara set the pot down more forcefully than necessary. "I'm just not sure what to do about it." "What's there to be sure about? He's a good man. He treats you well. Samuel would approve." "You don't know what Samuel would approve. I know he'd want you to be happy." Ida's voice softened. "I know he wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault." Clara sank into a chair across from her friend. "It's not about punishment. It's about, I don't know. Loyalty. Respect. Samuel's only been gone 7 months. And you think mourning longer will bring him back?" Ida shook her head. "Grief doesn't work that way, Clara. There's no set amount of time that makes it proper to move on. You move on when you're ready, and not a moment before. What if I'm never ready? Then you spend your life alone, and that man out there spends his life waiting, and both of you are miserable. Ida reached across the table and took Clara's hand. Is that what Samuel would have wanted? Clara thought about her husband, his laugh, his strength, his absolute insistence that life was meant to be lived fully and without regret. She thought about the dreams they'd shared, the future they'd planned, the children they'd hoped for. No, she admitted. That's not what he would have wanted. Then stop being afraid and let yourself feel something again. That night, Clara found Eli in the barn brushing down one of the new horses they'd acquired. She watched him for a moment, the easy way he moved, the gentle hands that soothed the nervous animal, the quiet competence that had become so familiar she couldn't imagine the ranch without it. Eli. He turned, surprise flickering across his face when he saw her expression. Clara. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took a breath. I need to tell you something. He set down the brush and gave her his full attention. That was one of the things she loved about him. When you spoke, he listened. Really listened, like your words were the most important thing in the world. Loved. The word echoed in her mind. When had that happened? I've been scared, Clara said slowly, feeling her way through the words. Ever since Samuel died, I've been terrified of feeling anything again. Because loving someone means you can lose them, and I don't know if I can survive that kind of loss twice. Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. But I've realized something. Clara stepped closer. I'm going to feel this fear whether I let myself love again or not. The only difference is whether I spend my life running from it or facing it. What are you saying? I'm saying. Clara's voice caught. She forced herself to continue. I'm saying that I care about you, more than I wanted to, more than I thought I could this soon after losing Samuel, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. Eli was very still. Clara. I'm not saying I'm ready for anything formal. I'm not saying I have it all figured out. I'm just saying that you're not the only one who's been standing somewhere and waiting. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Eli closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. I need you to be sure, he said quietly. I need you to be absolutely sure, because I can't do this halfway. I've spent too long running from things that matter. If we start this, I'm all in. I'm sure. He kissed her. Gentle at first, questioning, giving her every chance to change her mind. When she didn't, when she leaned into him and kissed him back, something broke loose between them. All the months of careful distance, of unspoken feelings, of wanting without acting. It all dissolved in the space of a single heartbeat. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was trembling. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Eli pressed his forehead against hers. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. Clara laughed, a watery sound that was half sob, half joy. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm not much of a poet. Good, I don't need poetry. She pulled back enough to look at him. I just need someone who'll stay. I'll stay. Eli's voice was rough with emotion. As long as you want me, as long as you'll have me, I'll stay. Clara believed him. For the first time since Samuel's death, she let herself believe in a future she couldn't see clearly, a future that was uncertain and frightening and full of possibilities. The news that Clara Thornton and Eli Callahan were courting spread through Dusty Creek faster than wildfire. Some people disapproved. It hadn't even been a year since Samuel's death. Others were happy for her. She'd been through enough, they said. She deserved some joy. Clara didn't care what anyone thought. She'd spent too much of her life worrying about other people's opinions. From now on, she would live for herself. Christmas came, and with it, the first real snow of the season. Clara and Eli sat by the fire in the house her grandfather had built, watching the flames dance while the wind howled outside. "I've been thinking," Eli said, breaking a comfortable silence. "About what?" "About the future." He shifted to face her. "About what comes next." Clara's heart beat faster. "What about it?" "I know it's soon. I know there are people who'll say it's too fast, that we haven't known each other long enough." He took her hands in his. "But I've known you long enough to know that I don't want to spend another day of my life without you. So I need to ask you something." "Eli." "Let me finish." His eyes were intense, burning with an emotion that made Clara's breath catch. "I came to this town with nothing. No home, no purpose, no reason to stay anywhere. Then I met you and everything changed. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me something worth fighting for." "You gave me those things too," Clara whispered. "Then marry me." The words came out rough, unpolished, utterly sincere. Not because it's proper or expected, or because people will talk if we don't. "Marry me because I love you, Clara Thornton. I love the way you fight for what you believe in. I love the way you never give up even when everything's against you. I love the person you are and the person you're becoming." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she was smiling. "You're supposed to be on one knee." Eli laughed and slid off the chair, dropping to his knee on the rough wooden floor. "Clara Mae Thornton, will you marry me?" She looked at him, this man who had bought her ammunition when no one else would, who had stood beside her through fire and fear and grief. This man who had been patient when she needed patience and strong when she needed strength. This man who loved her not in spite of her stubbornness and her scars, but because of them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Eli surged up and kissed her, lifting her off the chair and spinning her around while she laughed and cried and held on tight. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white, covering the burned pasture and the graves on the hillside and all the scars of the past months. Inside by the fire, two people who had found each other against impossible odds began to build something new. Not a replacement for what they'd lost, but something different, something their own. Clara thought about Samuel, about his laugh and his strength, and his insistence that life was meant to be lived. She thought about what he would say if he could see her now, in the arms of another man, planning a future he wouldn't be part of. And she knew with absolute certainty that he would be happy. They were married on a February morning, with snow still clinging to the ground, and the first hints of spring pushing through the frozen earth. The ceremony was small, just family and close friends gathered in the little church where Clara's parents had been married 40 years before. Ida Mercy made the dress. Marcus Freeman stood as Eli's witness. The Chens brought food, and Tom Henderson brought flowers he'd grown in his own greenhouse. Even Theodore Marsh made the trip from Denver, claiming he wanted to see how the story ended. Clara walked down the aisle alone. She'd considered asking Marcus or one of the other men who'd stood by her, but in the end, she decided to walk by herself. She'd fought her way to this moment. She would claim it on her own terms. Eli waited at the altar, looking more nervous than he had facing down 6 of Prescott's men. When Clara reached him, he took her hands and she felt them trembling. "You came," he whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought I might wake up and find out this was all a dream." Clara squeezed his hands. "It's not a dream. I'm here. I'm staying." The pastor began the ceremony, but Clara barely heard the words. She was too focused on Eli's face, on the love in his eyes, on the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. When it came time for the vows, Eli spoke first. "I came to this town a broken man." He said, his voice rough but steady. "I'd given up on finding a place to belong, on finding anyone who could see past my mistakes to the man underneath. Then I met you, and everything changed." He paused, collecting himself. "You didn't need saving, Clara. You were saving yourself just fine. But you let me stand beside you anyway. You let me be part of your fight. And somewhere along the way, your fight became my fight. Your home became my home. Your heart became my heart. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. I don't have fancy words, she said when it was her turn. I'm not good at speeches or poetry, but I know this: when everyone else walked away, you stayed. When I was at my lowest, you lifted me up. When I thought I'd never feel anything again, you reminded me that grief isn't the end of the story. She looked into his eyes. Samuel taught me what love could be. You're showing me what love can become. I choose you, Eli Callahan, today and every day that follows. The pastor pronounced them married, and Eli kissed her soft and sweet and full of promise. The reception was held at the ranch in the barn that Marcus had helped rebuild after the fire. Clara looked around at the faces of the people who'd become her family, not by blood, but by choice. Ida laughing with the Chen daughters, Marcus dancing with his wife, the Henderson children chasing each other between the tables. "What are you thinking?" Eli asked, sliding his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking that Samuel would have loved this." "He would have." Eli pressed a kiss to her temple. "He'd be proud of what you've built here. What you're still building." "What we're building," Clara corrected. "Together." The first year of their marriage was hard in all the best ways. They learned each other's rhythms, discovered each other's flaws, figured out how to argue without destroying, and how to make up without losing themselves. Eli had a temper that flared hot and fast, then disappeared just as quickly. Clara held grudges longer than she should have. They both had nightmares, his about the family he'd failed to save, hers about finding Samuel cold in their bed. But they also learned how to hold each other through the dark times. They learned that love wasn't just the easy moments, it was the hard ones too. It was showing up when you didn't feel like it, apologizing when you'd rather be right, choosing each other even when the choosing wasn't easy. In the spring, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She didn't tell Eli right away. She needed time to process the news herself, to sit with the miracle of it. She'd wanted children with Samuel so badly, had grieved their absence almost as deeply as she'd grieved his death. Now, at 30, she was going to be a mother. She told Eli on a Sunday evening after dinner when they were sitting on the porch watching the sun go down. "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Clara took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Something's right. Something's very right." It took him a moment. She watched the realization dawn in his eyes. Confusion, then understanding, then joy, so fierce it took her breath away. We're... Yes. Clara. Her name came out choked, reverent. "Are you sure?" "I saw the doctor yesterday. I'm sure." Eli pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt wetness on her neck and realized he was crying. "I never thought..." He pulled back, his face wet with tears. "I never thought I'd have this. A wife, a child, a home." He shook his head, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve this." "Stop that." Clara took his face in her hands. "You deserve this. You deserve all of it. And our child is going to grow up knowing they have a father who loves them more than anything in the world. They will." Eli's voice was fierce now. "I swear to you, Clara, I will never let them down. I will never let you down." "I know." She kissed him softly. "I know you won't." The pregnancy was difficult. Clara was older than most first-time mothers, and her body protested the changes with morning sickness that lasted all day, fatigue that left her unable to work past noon, and a constant low-grade anxiety that something would go wrong. Eli became almost comically overprotective. He tried to stop her from lifting anything heavier than a dinner plate. He hired extra hands so she wouldn't have to do any physical labor. He woke her in the middle of the night to ask if she was feeling all right. "You're going to drive me insane," Clara told him after he insisted on carrying her across a puddle that was barely an inch deep. "I can't help it. I'm terrified." Of what? Of losing you. Of losing the baby. Of everything going wrong. Eli ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear warring on his face. I know I'm being ridiculous. I know you can handle yourself. But every time I look at you, I think about all the things that could happen and I can't. Clara pulled him into her arms as best she could with her swollen belly between them. Listen to me, she said firmly. I am not going anywhere. This baby is not going anywhere. We are going to be fine. You can't know that. No, I can't. But I can choose to believe it. And I need you to choose that too. She pulled back to look at him. Fear is a liar, Eli. It tells you all the ways things could go wrong, but it never mentions all the ways things could go right. We've been through fire and bullets and men trying to take everything we have. We survived all of that. We'll survive this too. Eli closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, some of the fear had receded. You're right. I know you're right. I'm always right. It's one of my best qualities. He laughed despite himself. God, I love you. I love you too. Now stop treating me like I'm made of glass and let me walk across my own yard. Their son was born on a cool October evening with the leaves turning gold and the harvest moon rising over the mountains. The birth was long and hard, and there were moments when Eli thought he would lose them both. But Clara fought through it with the same determination she'd brought to every other battle in her life. And when their son finally entered the world screaming and red-faced and perfect, they both wept with relief and joy. What should we name him? Clara asked, exhausted but radiant, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. Eli looked at his wife and son, and his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. Samuel, he said quietly. If you're willing. Samuel Elijah Callahan. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Samuel, she whispered, looking down at her son. Samuel Elijah. Your namesake was the best man I ever knew. Your father is the bravest. Your mother is the strongest. Eli added, his voice rough. And you, little one, are going to grow up knowing that you are loved beyond measure. Baby Samuel opened his eyes and looked up at them, and Clara laughed through her tears. He has your eyes, she said to Eli. He has your stubbornness. I can already tell. Good. He's going to need it. The years that followed were full of challenges and triumphs of ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. The ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the largest operations in the territory. Clara and Eli worked side by side, building something that would last for generations. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved horses almost as much as his mother did, and had his father's quiet strength. When he was 3, Clara gave birth to twin daughters, Elizabeth and Rose, who had their mother's gray eyes and their father's dark hair. The house that Clara's grandfather had built grew too small for their expanding family, so they added rooms and porches expanding outward like the rings of a tree. The hillside where Samuel Thornton and Clara's parents were buried became a family cemetery, carefully tended and often visited. Clara made sure her children knew about the man whose name her son carried. She told them stories about Samuel's kindness and courage, about his dream of a community where everyone looked out for each other. She took them to his grave every year on the anniversary of his death, not to mourn, but to remember. He was my first love, she told them when they were old enough to understand. He taught me what it meant to be brave, and when he died, your father taught me what it meant to be brave again. Do you still miss him? Young Samuel asked one day with the blunt honesty of childhood. Sometimes, Clara admitted. But missing him doesn't mean I love your father any less. The heart has room for all kinds of love, all kinds of grief. Samuel the first. Samuel would have wanted me to be happy. He would have wanted your father to find a home. We honor him by living well, not by living in the past. Eli, listening from the doorway, felt his throat tighten with emotion. He'd never felt jealous of Samuel Thornton. The man had given Clara the strength she'd needed to survive, had shaped her into the woman Eli loved. In a strange way, he felt grateful to a man he'd never met. The town of Dusty Creek changed too. With Prescott gone, new businesses opened, new families moved in. The water rights that had been the source of so much conflict became a community resource shared among all the ranchers in the valley. Clara and Eli helped establish a school, a library, a community hall, where people could gather and celebrate and mourn together. Ida Mercy became a second grandmother to the Callahan children, spoiling them with sweets and teaching them to sew. Marcus Freeman's forge supplied half the territory, and his children grew up playing with Clara's children, the old prejudices fading with each new generation. The Chens opened a restaurant that became famous throughout Colorado, and the Hendersons rebuilt their ranch into something even better than before. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. There were droughts and blizzards, illness and loss. Eli's sister Mary died when the children were young, and he grieved her with a depth that reminded Clara of her own loss. Colonel Webb passed away peacefully in his sleep, and they named a colt after him. Ida Mercy's heart gave out one winter, and Clara cried for days, but through it all, they held on to each other. Through all the seasons of their lives, through joy and sorrow, through triumph and defeat, they chose each other. Every morning they woke up and made that choice again, and it was always the easiest choice either of them had ever made. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Clara and Eli stood on the porch of the home they'd built together, watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard below. Samuel, no longer young, but still carrying his father's kindness in his eyes, was teaching his own son to ride. Elizabeth and Rose were laughing over something, their dark hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. 20 years, Eli said, wonder in his voice. Doesn't seem possible. 20 years, 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Clara leaned against him, feeling the familiar strength of his arm around her shoulders. I'd say we've done all right. Better than all right. Eli pressed a kiss to her temple. That day in front of Patterson's store, when I saw you walk out with your head held high and fire in your eyes, I knew. Knew what? That I was going to love you. That you were going to change everything. He turned her to face him. I was right about the first part. I was wrong about the second. How so? You didn't change everything. You changed me. Eli's eyes were bright with emotion. You made me believe I could be more than my mistakes. You gave me a reason to stop running and start building. Everything good in my life started with you, Clara. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 20 years, he could still make her cry with a few honest words. You changed me too, she said softly. You taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. That love can grow from the ashes of loss. That choosing to be happy isn't a betrayal of the people we've lost, it's a tribute to them. They held each other as the sun sank lower, painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and rose. Below them, their grandchildren's laughter rang out like music. No regrets, Eli asked. Not a single one. What about... He hesitated. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Samuel had lived, if you'd never met me? Clara considered the question seriously. It was something she'd thought about over the years, usually late at night when the house was quiet and the past felt close. I would have been happy with Samuel, she said finally. We would have had a good life, but it would have been a different life, not better or worse, just different. She looked up at her husband. I don't believe in fate, Eli. I don't think things happen for a reason. But I do believe in choices. You chose to buy me that ammunition. I chose to let you stay. We've been choosing each other every day since, and that's built something beautiful. It has, Eli agreed. It really has. That night, long after the children and grandchildren had gone home and the house was quiet, Clara lay awake listening to Eli's breathing beside her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the grief and fear, the courage and love. She thought about Samuel resting peacefully on the hillside, and about all the people who had stood with her when she'd needed them most. She thought about the woman who had walked into Patterson's general store all those years ago, desperate and alone with blood on her dress and fire in her heart. That woman had been certain she would lose everything. She couldn't have imagined this, the family, the home, the love that had grown from the darkest moment of her life. Clara reached over and took Eli's hand, twining their fingers together the way they had 1,000 times before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "Love you too," Eli murmured, half asleep. She smiled and closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be chores to do, and grandchildren to spoil, and a ranch to run. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, new moments to treasure, and new memories to make. But tonight, Clara let herself simply be grateful. For the life she'd built, for the love she'd found, for the second chance she'd never expected, and the happiness she'd never stopped fighting for. The story that started with ammunition she couldn't buy, and a stranger who stepped forward when no one else would, had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It had become a legacy of courage and love passed down through generations, who would tell the tale for years to come. And at the heart of that story was a simple truth that Clara had learned the hard way and never forgotten, that the strongest people aren't those who never fall, but those who get back up. That love isn't about finding someone to complete you, but finding someone to stand beside you. And that home isn't a place, it's a choice you make over and over again every single day. Clara Mae Thornton. Callahan made that choice gladly, and she would make it again 1,000 times over for as long as she lived.